Okay, what if a major world religion and the very identity of its people wasn't this slow, organic development over centuries, but actually a deliberate imperial invention? It's a pretty wild idea, right? Well, in this explainer, we're going to neutrally unpack a controversial lecture that makes exactly that claim. We're going to follow its logic and its evidence step by step. So, the entire argument we're about to explore really hinges on this one provocative question. The source challenges us to think about something radical. What if some of the national identities we see as ancient and sacred were actually, well, man made? Strategic inventions created by empires to get what they want. So here's our roadmap for breaking this all down. First, we're going to look at the unique historical model the lecturer is working from. Then, we'll dive into the geopolitical game of empires. From there, we'll zero in on the main argument about Persia's master plan. And finally, we'll see how this ancient theory is being applied to our world right now. All right, first up, the toolkit. See, the lecturer doesn't just present historical facts. They're proposing a whole new model for how to interpret them, something they call predictive history. And it's a bold claim because the idea is that this model can not only show us hidden patterns in the past, but maybe even forecast what's coming next. This model is basically built on three pillars. First, you look for repeating patterns all throughout history. Second, you apply game theory. The idea that nations and leaders are rational players on a giant chessboard, always acting in their own self-interest. And third, and this is key, the argument is that to really understand a culture's ultimate goals, you have to analyze its foundational religious texts. Okay, so let's use that framework to look at the geopolitical game. According to this source, if you want to understand how empires really work, you first have to get your head around the two completely different kinds of war they fight. And the distinction the source makes here is pretty fascinating. On one side, you've got ritualized war. Think of this as a violent game played by insiders, the established powers. It has rules, and the goal isn't to destroy the other guy, but just to maintain the status quo. But then you've got total war. This is waged by outsiders who don't care about the rules. Their goal isn't just to win the game, it's to smash the whole board and create a brand new one. And that brings us to the main event, the source's big case study, the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. The lecturer presents Persia as the first great empire to completely master the art of total war, and, on top of that, develop these incredibly sophisticated new methods of imperial control. So, what was in Persia's toolkit? Well, their success, according to the source, wasn't just about military might. It was about smart governance, really effective administration, a knack for co-opting local elites, and building amazing communication networks. But the lecturer argues the master key, the ultimate strategy that held the whole thing together, was that last one: divide and rule. Okay, so we've got all the pieces on the board now. We're ready to tackle the source's central argument. And fair warning, it's the most controversial one. To get this, we need a little historical context. The ancient kingdom of Israel splits in two. Then the north gets conquered by Assyria. But the really crucial event here is in 587 BC, when Babylon sacks Jerusalem, destroys the temple, and carts the elite off into exile. The source argues that at this exact moment, the original unified Israelite identity is for all intents and purposes gone, wiped out. And that leads us right to this, the core thesis, laid out plain and simple. The lecturer claims that the identity we know today as Jewish wasn't just a continuation of that old Israelite one. No, it was something new, a construct, deliberately engineered by an empire for its own strategic purposes. So, how does this all connect? Well, the lecturer applies that divide and rule strategy right here. The theory goes like this. Persia needed to control the Levant. It's this vital land bridge between empires. To lock it down, they didn't just occupy it. They allegedly invented a client people, the Jews, whose entire existence and return to the land depended completely on Persian power. And what does that do? It creates a permanent source of conflict with the locals, ensuring the region could never unite against the empire. And to back this up, the source points to this quote from the Bible as direct evidence. So you have the returning exiles starting to rebuild the temple. The local people, who also see themselves as Israelites, offer to help out. But the exiles flatly refuse. They create this sharp division, and they claim their authority comes directly from the Persian king. The source says, see, that's the imperial strategy in action. But the theory doesn't just stop in ancient history. The lecturer argues that this exact imperial script has been dusted off and reused in the modern era. So first, take a look at this. This is the ancient decree from the Persian Emperor Cyrus, recorded in the Bible. It's what authorizes the return of the exiles and the rebuilding of their nation and their temple. Now look at this. The source puts that ancient edict side by side with the 1917 Balfour Declaration from the British Empire. The argument being presented is that this is not a coincidence. It's not just some historical echo. It is a conscious repetition of the exact same divide and rule strategy, an outside empire creating a client state in the Levant to protect its own geopolitical interests. So if you accept this idea of history as a repeating script, where does it lead? Well, the lecturer wraps up with 3 very specific predictions for the future. First, that the temple in Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Second, that Israel will eventually evolve into a full theocracy. And third, that its power in the region will just keep expanding. And so that leaves us with the big final question that this entire framework forces you to ask. It challenges us to look at the world not as a messy series of random events, but as a grand stage where these ancient imperial strategies might still be playing out. Which makes you wonder, who's writing the script for our chapter?